In this video, we're going to have a look at the theory behind anchoring. First thing to have a look at is, does the chart recommend it as an anchorage? In other words, can we see the anchor symbol on the chart? If we can't, I would avoid it and look somewhere else. We can see three examples here. We've got St Ninians Bay with the anchor symbol in the middle. We've got Blindman's Bay with the anchor symbol just between the 1 and the 7 metre depth. And we've got Scalpsea Bay with the anchor symbol right in the middle. All three quite nice anchorages. So on paper, any of them should work. So let's think of a few more factors to think about when we're anchoring. The big one is the wind direction now versus what the wind's going to do in, say, 12 hours or middle of the night. No one likes getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to relay an anchor. So we've got the wind now, which makes anchorage in the bottom, Scalpsea Bay, pretty good. St Ninians Bay, pretty good, is it sheltered? But the anchorage in the top of the chart, not so ideal, because it's exposed and the wind, albeit reasonably small fetch, will push you across and on to the land should anything go wrong, whereas the other two anchorages are sheltered. However, if the wind changes direction middle of the night, Scalpsea Bay suddenly becomes reasonably exposed. St Ninians Bay in the middle is still sheltered by Inchmarnock Island, and the anchorage at the top of the chart is also reasonably sheltered. Of those three, the middle one, St Ninians Bay, would be the one I would go to, given these two wind directions. So we've got some other factors to think about. We've looked at the shelter from the wind and the swell now. We also need to think about the tide rise and fall. Have we got enough anchor chain and warp to cater for a 3 to 4 metre rise or equally fall in tide? What does the seabed tell us? Have we got an anchor that's suitable for anchoring in the conditions? Is it stone? Is it sand, mud, kelp, for example? Have we got enough swinging room between ourselves and the land, or between ourselves and other vessels? Are there other vessels and hazards around that we need to allow for? And what is the wind going to do in the future? Another reasonably key factor, assuming that we have lots of nice safe anchorages to choose from, is how much chain and warp do we actually have on board, because that will govern how deep or shallow we have to anchor. There are several types of anchors, and I've highlighted a few here. In truth, the majority of them all do a pretty good job, and unless we're picky, we don't really get to choose what anchor we get on our boat. We kind of get given it. We've got a delta anchor, which has a really good holding to weight ratio. It's designed to stay on a bow roller on a boat, so a large motorboat or a yacht. It's self-launching, occasionally needs a little bit of help with the roller to get over the front, but generally it's self-launching. The downside of a delta anchor is they're normally pretty heavy. We've got a Bruce anchor, reasonably common these days. Again, really good holding to weight ratio. Or good to stow in the small anchor locker. At Danforth, we've got one of these on both our boats. Very good holding to weight ratio, even in windy conditions. It stows flat, but it is a bit of a pain. But the advantage is when you get it stuck in mud, it's a really good anchor. And as we can see from that last point, it can be hard to break free of mud. It tends to come up with a few kilograms of the mud on it. The CQR or the plough, again, a pretty good anchor. The only downside to it, besides the fact that it's hard to stow, but all of these anchors fall into the same category, except the Danforth, is they're going to live on a bow roller. So in that case, it's not too hard to stow. One bit to watch is that the CQR anchor can capsize. It can fall over in the mud because it's got a hinge. So now we've looked at where we can anchor and a couple of the factors and the type of anchor. We're now on to how much chain are we actually going to let out. Hypothetically, we've created a scenario where we've got 5 meters depth of water. That gives us enough clearance under the boat, and we've got a 1 meter freeboard to allow for. And this is quite a crucial number to not forget. We can let out, if it's just the chain, 4 times the depth of water. If it's chain and warp, 5 times the depth. If it's warp, 6 times the depth of water. And this is based on the depth of water at the time of anchoring, and it will almost certainly have to be adjusted, either pulled in or let out, depending on what the tide does. As a note, don't forget about your 1 meter freeboard, because you need to allow for that when calculating the chain and warp combination of how much you're going to let out. So once we've let out the correct amount, so how do we know if the anchor is holding and we're not dragging? Well, one of the best things we can do is to take what we call a transit. We line 2 objects up, ideally at 90 degrees out of either side of the boat, and check that they are in line with each other. In this example, we've picked a tree and the house in behind it. And we watch it for a couple of minutes just to make sure that they stay in line. And with reasonable confidence, this is our vessel not dragging. It's staying where we want it to be. If, however, after a couple of minutes, we check our transit and we can see that the house and the tree are no longer in line, with reasonable certainty, we know that the anchor is not holding in the seabed. So we've got a couple of options. We can either let out a little bit more anchor and take another transit, or we can pull the anchor back up and move to another anchorage and reset the process again.